Ahoy there, I'm Mr. McFacepunch. You can call me Chainsaw. Let's talk about the interviews about Dragon's Dogma 2 Dark Arisen. I'm a little late to these, but I'm busy. Leave me alone about it. Besides, a lot of people seem to miss most of these, especially the Japanese interviews, so you might still hear something new. There was a ton of new info dropped with all sorts of juicy details. A lot of the questions throughout the interviews were the same, but some of the answers gave different details to different outlets, so this will be a little recap that smooshes the interviews together so we can see a little bit of the bigger picture. So one of the common questions was, why is it called Dark Arisen? And in the Japanese IGN interview, Oyama says, actually, we decided on this title after the content was more or less finalized. As we discussed the title, we came to the conclusion that what we wanted to depict and tell in the story of the newly added Norgan area was very compatible with the name Dark Arisen. In addition, we have also added the hack and slash game cycle that was in the original Dark Arisen to this Dark Arisen. When we considered how to convey these elements to our users in an easy-to-understand way, Dark Arisen seemed to be the most appropriate word, and it felt right to us as well. So we decided on this title. So first, it matched the story they came up with. Second, the gameplay also matched the idea of Dark Arisen. And third, it's a title that's already familiar to the fan base and conveys those similar story and gameplay elements. Then people also ask how long it was in production. This one is also in most of the interviews. The production started 6 months after release, but the ideas for it started early. They just wanted to wait for feedback to roll in before they went full force. Oyama and Kinoshita are also asked about Itsuno leaving. Oyama, in the Gamer interview, says, regarding Mr. Itsuno's resignation, Capcom develops games as a team, so the departure of one individual would not mean that we would be unable to make Dragon's Dogma. In terms of the series' DNA, Mr. Itsuno is undoubtedly the creator, but we also have many staff members who have been involved since the very beginning. Kinoshita has also been involved with the Dragon's Dogma series for many years, serving as director for the previous title Dark Arisen, and also as director for Dragon's Dogma Online. With staff members possessing such experience, the DNA of the series has been firmly passed down to Capcom's development team. On top of that, we believe that we have been able to create Dragon's Dogma 2 Dark Arisen while cherishing the essence of the series. So I've been saying this for a while. It's true, a lot of the heads left, but they always had people working beside them, so that alone wouldn't stop them from making more stuff. The biggest concern is whether it holds up under the new management. So far, it looks pretty good, but we'll see how well it gets the small details when it's out. They also asked about the second anniversary art, and I thought this was cute. Oyama in the Dengeki Online interview says, personally, I created that artwork with the feeling that it was like a love letter to all the fans. At the time, we weren't yet at the stage where we could officially announce the title of this expansion content, and we were still consulting with external companies behind the scenes. Even under those circumstances, I wanted to give the fans a sense of reassurance and excitement that it's still okay to have high expectations for Dogma as we approached the second anniversary, so I included various messages. We were truly delighted and grateful that the discussions among our users were as engaging as we had hoped, creating an atmosphere that suggested something big is about to happen. Oyama seriously needs to be the new Dragon's Dogma dev sweetheart. We need to heap all sorts of praise on this guy. He literally wrote us a love letter. I love that they got asked this because that second anniversary art was such a huge moment for the community, and it's exactly what they wanted out of it. Sort of related to that, in a lot of these interviews, Oyama says the same thing where he listens to everything. In the Japanese IGN interview, Oyama says this, we received a tremendous amount of feedback after the release of Dragon's Dogma 2. Capcom alone has received tens of thousands of comments. As producer, my role is to read through all of them. I spent a considerable amount of time reading each and every one of them when we started this project. I translate comments from overseas, and after reviewing all of the feedback, I ask the director, how should we respond? In a sense, I think it's also the producer's job to convey the user's opinions to the team. While we take each and every opinion into consideration, it's naturally necessary to select and prioritize requests as we approach release. There are also conflicting opinions among users, so we consult with each other and decide on the content of this title update and additional content of what Dark Arisen should be as a part of the Dragon's Dogma series. It felt like the community was being ignored for so long. It's really nice to know that they were really paying attention. It's just another reason why Oyama needs to be put on a pedestal. Dude chose to wade waist deep in the toxic sludge that was this community for a long time. I can only hope that there were enough good-hearted, well-intentioned comments to make up for some of the more aggressive ones. Because, dude, this community got nasty. The Automaton Media interview also asked about updates after the Dark Arisen release. So they asked this. Regarding updates, are you planning to collect feedback after the release of Dragon's Dogma 2 Dark Arisen and consider adding features beyond just bug fixes? Oyama says, we are not considering that at this time. We are working to create a product that everyone can enjoy as a fully finished product at the time of release. So they're basically asking if they're going to do the same thing they did after launch, where they got feedback and built extra content with that feedback in mind. And the answer here is no, or at least there aren't any plans for that right now. That could change, or they could just move on to the next project altogether. This could just be a product of they're still working on this content, so before they make any plans for more content, they're going to finish what they started right now. Kinoshita was also asked if any player comments stuck out in particular, and this was his response. Rather than individual comments, I strongly felt the passion everyone was expressing, saying, "Don't let it end here! We believe in you, Capcom!" I thought, this is something we absolutely must do, and that's how we've been moving forward. So I have zero doubt that the Arisen Want More campaign had a real effect on this. They heard us loud and clear, and they've been diligently working, motivated by the many voices of the passionate fans who did not want Dragon's Dogma to end. So sincerely, thank you to everyone who was part of that movement, and thank you, Oyama and Kinoshita, for actually listening. So digging more into the content side of things, they're asked multiple times about playtime. In the Automaton Media interview, Oyama says this. This additional story takes place in a new area called Norgan. We anticipate it will take approximately 15 to 20 hours to complete. Other interviews specifically specify that the main scenario is what takes 15 to 20 hours. Additionally, 12 unique dungeons will be added to the main game. Each of these dungeons is expected to take about 30 minutes to an hour to complete. With 12 dungeons, we believe the entire expansion will provide over 25 hours of enjoyment. So these estimates are heavily lowballed. They don't include exploration, gear grind, and they might not even be including side quests. And there are side quests, by the way. They're mentioned in loosely in some interviews, but the recent Steam interview asked about it directly. Kinoshita said, yes, absolutely. You can also pick up new quests from characters they encounter in Norgan, such as locales in Norgandian settlement and members of a research expedition that arrived in the region like the Arisen. I've seen people question whether or not this is enough, and I think it is. For comparison, they give their estimate on the content in the base game. In the Automaton Media interview, Kinoshita says, in addition, the main game of DD2 itself has 30 to 40 hours of gameplay. So I think those who purchase both the main game and the expansion together and play for the first time will have plenty of content to enjoy in total. Now, I don't know about you guys, but so far I've squeezed over 600 hours out of that 30 to 40 hours of gameplay, and that's without a satisfying endgame loop. And my numbers are rookie numbers. Lots of hardcore Dogma gamers have thousands of hours from that 30 to 40 hours. Also, just comparing the estimated numbers. If you go with the 30-hour estimate, the DLC isn't too far from the base game in terms of content. It's like 80-ish%. Even if you go with the 40-hour estimate, it's still more than half of the entire base game. It's like 60-ish%. That's huge. Anyone who feels the 25-hour number isn't high enough isn't considering the full context. This DLC is going to be meaty. So speaking of content, they also talk about how much new equipment is going to be in the game. In the Japanese IGN interview, Kinoshita says, regarding equipment, we've added a total of about 150 completely new weapons and armor sets across the entire DLC. So 150 is, if you compare it to the base game numbers, is a little low, but that's still a lot of new stuff to collect. Also, in the Game Watch interview, Kinoshita says, this time, support pawns can also be equipped with the items, so like the relics, so you can use them to dress up your makeshift party and continue your adventure. Okay, so this is important because in the first Dark Arisen, you couldn't give like the Bitter Black exclusive items to support pawns, only your main pawn. You could gift like the raw, unpurified Bitter Black 3 armor and weapons and stuff, but not the actual items. So this is kind of cool because if you get a really good roll that you know is good for your friend but is not good for you, you can gift it to their pawn and then, share equipment that way, and I think that's really cool. Okay, talking about content, there's also some lack of content to talk about. They are asked about Vocations. In the Game Watch interview, Kinoshita says, there are no new jobs. We will create a new area. To achieve that, we need to create new enemies and new areas, and enemies are an important part of the game cycle, so we focused on those aspects in this game. However, it wouldn't be fun if nothing changed for the player, so we've shifted our focus to enriching the customization skills and are putting all our efforts into that. Then in the Dengeki Online interview, Oyama says, yes, there will be no new jobs added. We certainly considered adding new jobs, but creating a new area means we would have to create new enemies to place there as well. So I'm a little mixed on this, but it was probably the right call. I'm in the minority that didn't think the enemy variety was that bad. The way I interact with Dragon's Dogma is skewed more towards what I, as the player, am able to do rather than what the enemy is doing. So if they added a monk vocation, just as an example, it would add more for me than a couple extra enemies would. But at the same time, I'm not going to be sad to see a wider variety of enemies. I think, if anything is a good reason to forsake new vocations, monster variety was such a huge complaint that it's probably the one. So, no monk, no mystic knight, but because of that, they were able to make more enemies to better fill out the new area, and I think that's alright. So then, as we get into more of the gameplay-focused kind of stuff, it's asked, how do we start the DLC? And this is good because this is a question that I had. Kinoshita says, in Dark Arisen, there are 2 new content areas. The new area, the Land of Ruin, and the 12 dungeons, the Forgotten Trials. Both can be started by talking to an NPC named Brant in the tavern at night and accepting the quest. So you can actually start these quests really early, like as soon as you reach Vermund, and that's pretty cool. The recommended starting level, Kinoshita says this, the recommended level for the Forgotten Trials is 20, and for the Land of Ruin, it's recommended from level 40. Currently, the majority of players clear Dragon's Dogma 2 are around level 60, so we've designed the difficulty to provide a combat experience that closely matches that level. Then they also talk about a difficulty gradient for both of these. Oyama says, regarding the Forgotten Trials, I believe we mentioned earlier that the recommended level is 20, but of course we have prepared a gradient of difficulty levels starting from level 20 in the dungeons scattered throughout the main game. The last 3 of the trials are going to be exclusive to the Unmoored world, so those ones are going to be endgame level for sure. I thought they were all going to be endgame dungeons, since they're hiding behind spell seal doors. I took that to mean you needed the Godsbane to open them, but that is not the case. All you have to do is accept the quest. This difficulty gradient is also true for the story in Norgan. In the Automaton media interview, Oyama says, on the other hand, players who have thoroughly enjoyed the main story may have already surpassed level 40. Such players can easily enter Norgan and proceed with their adventure. Even in that case, they will enter a game cycle where they collect random relics, which are weapons and armor, so we have designed it so they will feel a reasonable challenge in battles. Then in the latest Steam interview, Kinoshita says, even in normal mode, the difficulty gradually ramps up as players progress through the expansion content, with enemy encounters becoming increasingly challenging along the way. As players reach the middle and later stages of the content, we've balanced it so that even those who have already hit the stat cap can still enjoy a meaningful level of challenge. So if you're stronger, you'll have an easy entrance, but the difficulty ramps up to provide a meaningful challenge, even if you're already at the stat cap. But if you really want the game to just break your face, you can definitely start a new game, run straight to Norgan as soon as you hit Vernworth at around like level 8 to 10. That is a real option if you really just hate yourself and want to experience as much pain as possible. Speaking of pain, hard mode. In the JP IGN interview, Kinoshita says, on the other hand, we understand there are veteran adventurers who have played through the game and reached level 999. So we are currently considering implementing a hard mode for those users. Even those who have reached the so-called overcap can still experience the high-level content in hard mode. Some interviews only left this at considering implementing, and that ruffled some feathers. That sort of makes it a question as to whether or not they would actually make a hard mode, but in the Japanese interviews, it becomes extremely clear that they are working on the hard mode. The very next statement in this interview was a direct confirmation. Oyama says, regarding the hard mode, it is currently under development, so please wait a little longer for an official announcement about its availability. And there are multiple interviews where it is directly confirmed, but most people seemed to miss it and only caught on with the more recent Steam interview. Here's some of those statements. In the Gamer interview, Kinoshita says, incidentally, while the addition of DLC has made it easier to progress while leveling up, we are also diligently working on the implementation of a hard mode. We hope that experienced adventurers and those who have already reached the level cap and stat cap will choose hard mode and enjoy more challenging battles. In the Game Watch interview, Kinoshita says, actually, we're diligently preparing a hard mode for truly skilled adventurers who have reached the level cap. We're planning to offer a challenging combat experience by allowing them to choose hard mode. Then also in the Game Watch interview, Oyama says, adding the Forgotten Trial will make it easier to proceed. I think that's true, but we're working hard to figure out how to present the hard mode to everyone in a way that gives the game a challenge and prevents it from becoming too easy. In the Dengeki Online interview, Oyama says we are diligently working on creating a hard mode to balance the difficulty and ensure the game doesn't become too easy. Then in the most recent Steam interview, Kinoshita says, also we're working on a hard mode that will provide a satisfying challenge for seasoned players whose stats have reached or are approaching the level cap. Oyama also says, please stay tuned for further updates regarding the details of hard mode and its release window. So the consideration involved is how they're going to implement the hard mode, not whether or not there will be one. They know how much people want it. And I am, once again, in the minority where hard mode probably isn't even my top 10 wants for the game, but it is good to know that they're putting a lot of thought into how to implement it. A mindless number go up hard mode wouldn't add anything substantial. You have control over your stats in that if you want enemy number bigger in comparison to your number, you can just equip weaker equipment.
No.
Yes, you can, Melvo. On meaningful hard mode, probably should increase the stats to some extent. But if it's just that, then it doesn't do anything meaningful. They'd have to do something like changing enemy behavior to make them more aggressive, or changing the enemy spawns to be more difficult versions of enemies. These two things would actually provide some sort of gameplay variety. It just has to change something more than stats. If it does that, I'll be pretty happy. But we'll see. They're still working on it. We don't have any real details right now. In the vein of difficulty, they are asked about scaling enemies to the player's level, and this is what they have to say. In the Automaton Media interview, Kinoshita says, "We haven't implemented a system where the enemy's strength changes proportionally to the player's strength. We understand that a system where enemy strength fluctuates according to the player's strength might be a matter of personal preference." I am definitely one of the players that thinks enemy scaling is stupid. It completely negates growth. If enemies just scale with your level, the levels become meaningless. At that point, you're better off just making a normal action game rather than an action RPG. So I am personally glad they're taking a different approach to difficulty. Then this is a big one. In a lot of these interviews, they straight up confirm Transmog as a feature. Kinoshita says, Norgan introduces a new element of layering, which is a cosmetic feature. So all the equipment you acquire is designed to be enjoyed not as disposable items, but as cosmetic items. Oyama continues, in Dragon's Dogma 2, even just focusing on the visual elements, there were a certain number of people who enjoyed it. Creating your own Arisen and your own pawn and traveling together is one of the main attractions of this game, so we wanted to give them more options for customizing their characters with this DLC. Kinoshita adds on to that. In addition, I think there are people who want to accept the visuals of people dressed up, and others who want to play in a world without dressing up. So, as a game option, you can choose whether to play in a world where dressing up is accepted or a world where dressing up is not necessary. Oyama adds on to that, whether you're someone who loves the gameplay and the world of the original Dragon's Dogma 2, or someone who wants something a little more casual, you can switch between these options to enjoy the game. We hope to provide title updates and DLC that offer a wider range of gameplay and choices. Kinoshita then says, that's right. It's possible that someone is incredibly strong on the inside, but is wearing clothes that look like cloth on the outside. I thought that having options was necessary so that people could choose how to react to that confusion. So Transmog is an option. You can turn it on and off. That way, like if you really just want to know what equipment people have without fiddling with checking everything, you can turn it off. If you don't really care too much about the stats, then, if you don't care about checking the stats, then you can do that and leave Transmog on and see everybody's fancy little dress up guys. I don't know. It's good that it's an option. I think that's nice. In some of the early interviews, they said that there was requirements to unlock the Transmog, but they didn't share them. And in the recent Steam interview, they kind of changed that. So, in the Steam interview, Oyama says there will also be a side quest chain in the expansion that, upon completion, will unlock the feature that allows you to change the appearance of weapons and armor obtained in Norgan to that of other gear while retaining its original stats and performance. So, Transmog is actually locked behind a whole line of side quests within Norgan. So then, in some of these interviews, they talk about the gear grind a little bit. In the Gamer interview, Kinoshita says, relics are a core element of Kingdom of Ruin. By acquiring and appraising unidentified equipment, their performance is revealed, and you can enjoy discovering what abilities are attached to them. You can then choose equipment that suits you, become stronger, and move on to the next adventure. The performance determined by appraisal includes a wide range of basic stats, such as attack and defense power, and the special effects granted also change each time. These effects can enhance custom skills or grant special abilities, and the content changes depending on the rank of the artifact. The fundamental game cycle involves collecting such randomly generated equipment, pursuing the most user-friendly and enjoyable build for yourself, strengthening your character, and progressing through the adventure and story. Kinoshita also says, the weapons and armor you can obtain in the Forgotten Trials will improve in performance by being upgraded, just like in the main game. On the other hand, the weapons and armor you can obtain through hack and slash in the Ruined Land do not have the usual upgrade elements. Instead, the abilities that are granted change each time you appraise them. So it is designed so that you can enjoy the randomness of what kind of abilities you will get, rather than improving the performance. So this is an interesting choice. Dwarven smithing has been the absolute best of the smithing options for just about everything because of how strong knockdown and knockdown resistance is. But now with the relics, it sounds like you might just have to hope that your equipment rolls with high knockdown, unless all the knockdown stats are just the same. I mean, we don't know how it'll end up working yet, but I just know getting a god roll on stats and custom skills on the right piece of equipment is going to be a nasty grind. Maybe the rolls will be a little more generous this time around, but just getting the right piece of equipment with only one specific bonus on it could be excruciating in Bitter Black Isle. Once it took me over 200 rolls of BBI level 3 armor to get an Oblivion coat with the good health restoration effect. Now we have a whole host of skills and stats on top of getting the right piece of equipment. If it's not balanced just right, you'll spend your whole life trying to get one optimal piece of equipment. But we won't really know how it's tweaked until we actually get our hands on it. I just really hope it turns out all right. They also talk about new enemies a little bit in these interviews. In the JP-IGN interview, Kinoshita says, the first enemies you encounter when you arrive in Norgan are the Belkin, a savage, warrior-like tribe whose language you can't understand. When visibility is poor due to blizzards, they have a habit of using wolves to hunt down and kill their prey, communicating with a unique voice. As soon as you step into Norgan, an eerie voice echoes in the blizzard. The player is surrounded, wolves come running, and you can see a group of people and you think, what should I do? We've made it possible to enjoy experiences and battles where a group of humans attack in conjunction with the environment, something that wasn't done in the main game. Of course, there were wolves in the main game as well, but they acted individually, whereas now the wolves that the Belkin are leading will bite the player's arm to stop their movement, and in the meantime, the Belkin will approach and try to smash their head in with an axe, creating a situation where you can really feel their coordination. So they describe some of the gameplay surrounding the Belkin and how they interact with wolves and the environment, and it's all sounding really cool. But then Belkins are just big bandits, right? I mean, they're more humans, but they are specifically asked about new enemies, and they do confirm that there will be new enemies that aren't just variants of previous ones. Kinoshita says, of course, there are also enemies whose skeletons are being made from scratch. So, brand new skeletons, not variants, not anything. Like, I think the variants in Dragon's Dogma 2 are really good. They do a good job of making them unique. And if we look at Bitter Black Isle, like, almost every enemy was just a variant. So, it is good to know that they are making completely new enemies. Then, sort of related to the Belkins, there are new pawn functions, and we saw some of this in the trailer, but they talk about it in interviews. Oyama says, conversely, if you give the command, help me, when you're captured by a wolf, your pawn will rush to your aid and rescue you. In that respect, I think we've managed to express the kind of combat that's characteristic of Dragon's Dogma. Kinoshita adds on, we've prepared new ways of thinking and movements for the pawns, such as putting their own lives on the line to help. In the trailer, there's a scene where the player is frozen by the ice breath of a giant hairy cyclops-like monster called a Norgan giant, and the pawn comes running to save them. We've consciously designed it so that those who enjoyed the main game can enjoy even more intimate combat. Then in the gamer interview, Kinoshita says, furthermore, new cooperative actions will be implemented to support exploration and combat, such as pawns reaching out and lifting you up to higher places when climbing on enemies. In addition, the 4.0 update will add new specialties, and along with these, the pawn's voices, actions, and thoughts will also be updated. So, new specialties is cool, but honestly, I still feel like we need more variety for pawn inclinations. Having just like 4 personalities for a pawn is really, really rough. In Dragon's Dogma 1, we were able to, although it was like janky how you did it, you could customize how your pawns responded to individual scenarios, so you could kind of custom build your pawn's personality. You could have them respond softly in matters that deal with the Arisen, like they'll be really careful with you, they'll be nice and sweet to you, but then absolutely monstrous towards enemies. Like, you could really adjust the fine details. And man, straightforward being the only option for an aggressive pawn is really bad. Because, like, what if you just want an aggressive pawn who's just very serious? Or an aggressive pawn who's, like, maniacal or sadistic or something like that? Like, there's just not enough options for pawn personalities. So I appreciate the new voices, new actions, and like the new behaviors that come with the specialties. But like it not being able to change the core personalities that drive those specialties is a little rough. Also, this is a random thing, and it's not from one of the Japanese interviews. It's from the German Eurogamer interview. I'm pretty sure most people know about this by now, but there's also a new mechanic with a wolf in the new village area that you can essentially adopt and keep as a pet. It will help you search for loot, set out to find new items itself, or even lead you to locations where it has tracked something down. By offering you loot through various means, we hope the Relic system will feel significantly more diverse. So, Capcom is like literally straight up giving us a puppy. This sounds like something that would be made up, but it's not. It's real. It's 100% real. And let me tell you, nothing bad better happen to my good boy. I will be very peeved. So then let's talk about the story a little bit. They don't have a whole lot in there, but there are some significant details. So first off, with the 12 Pathfinder trials. The setting of the Forgotten Trial is that it has been challenged by many Arisen in the past, and as you progress through the dungeon, you can obtain equipment that was used by previous Arisen. Furthermore, by completing the Forgotten Trial, the story will also be meaningful, as it will reveal the background of why this dungeon was created and why it exists. And since the last 3 are in the Unmoored world, I think these details are going to be very significant. I wasn't really expecting any real story at all for the trials. Maybe just like one line here or there that ties into the spider web of lore. But it sounds like they're going to give us a lot more than I expected. It isn't going to be some in-depth narrative like they're setting up from Norgan. It's nothing super plot heavy. But if they do a good job tying it into the setting, it could give us a lot of good lore stuff and help round out some of the thinner narrative. I'm really looking forward to it. Personally, I'm really curious what the deal is with those trials being in the Unmoored world. Is it like remnants of a past world? Is it somehow expected that Arisen should in some way bring about the Unmoored world? It's going to be interesting to see how that's tied together. Then, obviously, the bulk of the story is going to be for Norgan. And in the JP-IGN interview, Kinoshita says this: Norgan, the setting, is in the far north and is also a place where a great disaster occurred. Starting at the foot of a snowy mountain, you venture into deep snow, and as you get closer to the heart of the story, the environment becomes darker and more eerie, creating an experience where you get closer and closer to the core of the narrative. Then, in the Automaton Media interview, Kinoshita says, the main setting of the game is the continent where Vernworth and Batal are located, but far to the north lies an unknown territory that once flourished. It is revealed that in the past, like Vermund, there was a lot of human traffic and interaction, but it perished due to the harsh environment of being in the far north, or some unknown problem whose details are now unknown. When something strange happens in this supposedly destroyed territory, the player character will experience a story in which they pursue the mystery of that area. The lower slopes aren't covered in much snow, but as you venture deeper, you're enveloped in snow, and there are places where the blizzard never stops, creating a sense of breadth and variation. As you go even further, you start to see some truly unmistakable anomalies. And then finally, with the gamer interview, Kinoshita says, the music for the fields and stages is created with a gradual shift in mind, as I mentioned earlier, for each area. From the relatively calm areas at the foot of the mountain to the snow-covered areas as you get closer to the depths, the environment changes to one that evokes a sense of eeriness and tension. The background music is structured to change in stages in accordance with these changes in the story and location. So, throughout all these interviews, they really hammer home that as you move closer and closer to the core of the narrative, the environment gets harsher and harsher. And there's this sense that at the center is something supernatural, being described as dark, eerie, and unmistakably anomalous. So you may or may not know this, but elements in Dragon's Dogma, fire, ice, dark, holy, they all have symbolic meaning to the story, and ice as an element was used in the theme of Dark Arisen, Coils of Light, to describe what was going on with Daimon and Bitter Black Isle. Coils of Light refers to Daimon as cold and immane, and Bitter Black Isle as his frozen domain. And this is deeply meaningful when you consider that the will to survive that sustains creation is symbolically tied with fire. So then this twisted will bent towards destruction is symbolically represented by ice. But in Dark Arisen 1, this ice was merely symbolic, never literal. Dark Arisen 2 seems to be fusing the literal and the symbolic by having the blizzard get stronger and stronger as you get closer to the core of the narrative. Then in the Famitsu interview, they're asked, lastly, are there any Easter eggs, hidden elements, that would surprise players who have played previous games? Kinoshita says, well, there is, but if I say that, if I were to put it away, in parentheses, wry smile, I would really like to answer, but it depends on which title and what you're playing, and I think it would spoil the surprise of discovery. So I'd like you to actually play the new content and discover it for yourself. Then Oyama follows up, however, those Easter eggs aren't a crucial element of the series, and you can still thoroughly enjoy it even if you start with this game. Please enjoy Dragon's Dogma 2 Dark Arisen with peace of mind. I love how coy Kinoshita plays this. It really feels like he's genuinely excited to see the players' reactions to whatever Easter eggs they have cooked up, and it makes me just as excited to discover them. Alright, that's all I really wanted to share out of these interviews. That's obviously not everything, but I'll link all the interviews I've mentioned in the description so you can read them yourself if you really want to. And of course, this wasn't literally every single interview. There's a lot out there to dig through. I feel like the more they tell us, the more promising it keeps sounding. What are you looking forward to the most? For me, I cannot wait to dig into this story and unravel all these mysteries they keep teasing. Anyway, thanks for hanging out. Till next we meet, one foot after the next. Come what may.